Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to welcome Offsets Market to present their Innovation Action pitch.
Thank you. So today we're presenting our local marketplace for greenhouse gas offsets. I'm Candice Ammori. I'm a grad student with a background in business, policy, and statistics now.
I'm Mansi Bhatt. I have background in business and currently working on operations engineering.
I'm Ariel Cribbins, and I'm currently a graduate student in public health and have a background in policy and psychology.
So our team's interest is in sustainable cities. We started local by looking through Ann Arbor's 5-year sustainability plan, and we're especially struck with one of their initiatives, and this one focused on home energy efficiency. So in Ann Arbor, home energy efficiency accounts for about a quarter of all emissions. And to learn more about home efficiency, we spoke to many different people. So here's a sampling of 5 categories of people that we spoke to on the next slide. First, we went to the city of Ann Arbor to confirm that home energy is a really important part of the total plan. Then we spoke to DTE and Consumers Energy, who provide free home audits to their customers in the area. They mentioned that they are hitting their mandated audits, and they don't, in theory, they would love to do more, but they don't really have a business incentive to do more. So then we spoke to someone who had worked at the city of Aspen, and they had done a similar project to what we wanted, but their government grants dried up. And so finally, we thought, let's talk to business people and venture capitalists. And so what they told us was that, because they're looking for profitable businesses, right? And they came up with one idea, which was incentivizing people to start things like algae farms or composting so that they could actually sell those as verifiable carbon offsets. So then that got us interested in carbon offsets in general. So first I want to define what that is. It's a way for companies who emit carbon, which are on this graphic on the left side, to invest in emission reduction and renewable energy projects, in tree planting, and that's represented on the top and then going to the right, and to receive a certificate stating that they have offset a certain number of tons of carbon, which is called their carbon credit. And so why do people do carbon offsets? The essential goal is carbon neutrality and eventually net negative carbon, which is what we will need as a society to continue to be healthy environmentally. And so in many circumstances, it's impossible to reduce all of your emissions. So on the left side, you have gross emissions of a company. They can reduce emissions through more sustainable operations, which is that little part on the top right, emissions reduction. But they get to a certain point where they're just still emitting, and they will be for a little bit. So to achieve carbon neutrality or zero emissions, for those remaining unavoidable emissions, they are offset using carbon credits. And so currently, on the next slide, you'll see that the offsets market is between $40 and $120 billion. So it's a huge market, and this graph actually shows that it's growing. So all available issued offsets are in dark green there, and then the retired ones, which have been purchased, are in light green. And what you can see is that soon the demand of offsets will surpass the supply of offsets. So we thought this was really interesting. On the next slide, we wanted to go more into what type of offsets are currently available. What you'll see is that more than half are actually in forestry, in land use. But if you're in Ann Arbor and you're a company based even in the US in general, but especially here, you're probably not going to be able to plant a lot of trees or stop a forest from being cut down in Ann Arbor locally. You might have to buy an offset in Indonesia or across the country in South America. So it makes it hard to understand your impact on the environment when your offsets aren't really local, and instead they're in faraway communities. So the other thing to notice here is that these are the activities that are currently available that reduce, but they're activities that reduce carbon that are not currently available as offsets, and they're not currently on this graph because there isn't a marketplace and a verification process currently available. So on the next slide, we'll see that we understand that there are some issues right now with offsets. The main one is that it doesn't actually get to the root of the problem. And we understand that, but also offsets are going to help us become carbon neutral. And so we think it's important to at least optimize that process. And the way that we want to optimize that process is to make verification simpler and to allow more activities to become certified and considered offsets locally so that they can benefit the local community and economy. So this is our solution. X marks the spot on this graphic. On the left side, you have the companies that are emitters, and they're going to be purchasing offsets. And then on the right side, you have the buyers, they're the sellers. And in this case, they're actually going to be the city. So we're taking Ann Arbor City's initiative for home efficiency and then allowing companies to buy offsets to fund that project. And we are going to be the marketplace that matches those local emissions reduction projects to the businesses with a local footprint. If you go back to the next slide, we're going to go back to the home efficiency example. and look at the breakdown. So you have 73,500 metric tons of carbon that can be reduced. And the price per carbon is actually only $3.70, which was amazing when we realized that, because in the market right now, other projects are from $5 on the low end to about $15 on the high end. So we realize that there's a clear market opportunity here, and the price per carbon is actually very, very low in this project. And so in the next slide, you'll see that the main value propositions that we believe that we provide in our marketplace is one, just the frictionless market. It's the opportunity to verify new offset opportunities that are currently unavailable in the local community, and then a place for US companies and local companies to purchase these offsets, create a frictionless experience between buyers and sellers. We would take a traditional software marketplace cut, which is just a simple percentage of each transaction, knowing that there's, again, room in that price per carbon to still be market competitive from $5 to $15. It also allows offsets to directly benefit local economies and local communities. And then finally, there are actually some interesting ways to brand it. So the city and companies can work together to think through how to allow branding opportunities, like maybe signs on buses, if that's one of the offset ideas. So I think the future is bright. The growth opportunities are huge. In Ann Arbor, this project is actually only covering 10% of households, so there's room to grow even within this one subset of a project within Ann Arbor. There are also 550 cities in the US who are looking to be more carbon neutral, so there's expansion across different cities. And actually in most cities, home emissions are 3/4 of total emissions because they don't have a huge university there. So this can actually make a huge impact, and we can provide the backbone and the infrastructure for many new types of local offsets to be purchased across the country. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you. Judges, do you want to go ahead and jump right in with questions?
I have a question about the types of offsets. So from the standpoint of the environment, the atmosphere is pretty indifferent to how you remove CO2. And the questions involving maybe two parts. One is the question of additivity, whether somebody else would pursue this project in the absence of this investment. And two, how planting trees compares with other ways of removing carbon from the atmosphere.
So I can answer the planting trees question. There have been a lot of reports around how planting trees, so trees and soil really are the best way to sequester carbon right now that we know of. Like there's no.
Well, I can chime in on this too, Candice. So
okay, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was going to say that when it comes to, right now the market is dominated by forestry and land use sales of offsets. However, some of the most effective ways to prevent or reduce emissions or sequester emissions come from some of these other sectors that aren't being as well marketed. The problem with the forestry and land use one is, although they can be very effective, you need about 100 years to keep the amount of carbon out, like to see your effect, your benefit. So the reason we were thinking some of these other projects would be useful is because they might affect like the nitrogen oxide, like the NO2, the CFCs, the HFCs, the hydrofluorocarbons, which have, in methane, even though they have a much smaller output, like per tonnage, their equivalent of carbon, if heating tons, is actually much more impactful. And they're also what more industrialized countries are putting out, along with all of our fossil fuel burning. So if you do stuff, if you work locally on some of these sort of in these advanced markets, you're actually making a bigger footprint than this offset market reflection is showing. Then did I hit? Go ahead.
Also, with regards to additivity, Ariel, can you go to the last slide, please?
Yep.
So basically, we did think about the additivity piece of the carbon offsets project. So what the general process, the one after this? Oh, okay, it's okay. So one of the ways, the one after this. yeah, one of the ways offsets market generally ensure additivities, they have third-party validation companies such as American Carbon Registry and CAR. And I mean, that's the point. Like, we'll probably work with these kind of with these stakeholders along with the city of Ann Arbor and the energy companies working in Ann Arbor to ensure that the projects that we design for these carbon offset marketplace will actually be in addition to what is being already done. So, yeah.
Another point that we wanted to make is
Ariel,
that...
let's make sure we have some questions from the judges.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Sorry.
When you guys talk about your potential customers, so the people buying, the groups buying credits, outside of consumers and DTE, you kind of talked about how they're interested in home efficiency. Have you talked with companies that are buying lots of credits to understand what kind of a scale you would eventually need to be able to grow this to, such that you're moving enough volume to be of interest?
Right. So, we've not spoken to a organization per se who's buying these kind of carbon offsets, but from what we've learned from like articles and the general knowledge that is available on around, is that like a lot of these companies tend to they have two aspects to any carbon neutrality project that they're planning. Like, one is that it's sort of like they reduce the emissions in the specific area or the specific factory. Like, for instance, Google has data centers around USA. So one of the projects that they do is they ensure that the energy used in these data centers is really low, and then they end up looking at global markets or at large-scale projects to sort of ensure that their carbon emissions are sort of neutralized by carbon offsets. So one of the things that we realize is that there is, we also have a lot of individuals that buy carbon credits for themselves, who tend to offset the carbon consumption that they have if they're like taking flights or if they're like frequent flyers. So there are a lot of smaller markets available as well. We don't necessarily have to have like 1 million ton of carbon available for one single company. There are a lot of buyers who will buy carbon offsets in pieces as well. So that way we feel the solutions that we've developed will be sort of available for those individuals as well. So, yeah.
One quick note, I don't think I did as good of a job as explaining that we wanted to start really small in the beginning. So focusing first on Ann Arbor, focusing first on like one subset of their sustainability goals. And then even in that, it's only counting 10% of the households, that there's room to grow. But even with that, 73,500 carbon tons is actually a pretty large amount that a local company would get a sizable offset from. The idea is to start small and then be able to scale it from there once we have some learnings.
Got it. Thank you.
So if you have time for one more question, a central feature of any marketplace is liquidity. And you guys are actually going in the opposite direction, which is you're making it local, which would reduce liquidity, which would, as far as I can tell, would make the market much less effective and attractive to potential buyers and sellers. So help me think through, how have you guys thought about just basic liquidity problems?
An excellent question. And we haven't really discussed basic liquidity problems. Do you have a thought, Candice?
Yeah, I had a quick thought. So I think for me, a big value add was having more projects available, right? And I think that the attractiveness is that making it more attractive for local companies to buy local offsets. On one side, like I think companies are trying to buy local, and that's attractive. It's good for employees, for branding, all of those sorts of things. And then on the other end are these offset projects that aren't really available locally. And so in my head, the main value is putting those local offsets even on the marketplace and giving them the same sort of liquidity that other like far offsets that are in faraway lands have. So you're right that it may not be increasing liquidity in the general market, but I think what we're focusing on is like local US companies looking for local, even like city specific offsets, making those available and then providing a marketplace for that that's at least comparable to the ones that are right now available in Indonesia. And I think there's enough wiggle room in that price, right? Like $3.70 up to $5 on the lower end. Like there's still, there's a cost, I think, there that we haven't obviously.
Okay.
I was going to say.
Thank you so much, Candice. Thank you so much, Mansi and Ariel. Thank you so much, Offsets Market. We'll see you again at 3:30, and we appreciate your pitch today.